Hi, everyone. Welcome to All Things Creative. I'm your host, Linda Riesenberg Fisler. I'm an author, artist, and as I said, the host of this podcast. Today, we've got Bridgette, and I didn't ask you in the green room because we went through everything else. How do you pronounce your last name? Mongeon?
Brigitte, it's Bridgette Mongeon.
Ah, okay. Brigitte. I have to remember this now. So, naturally, a French background.
Yes.
Yeah. So, you are a sculptor. You're our first sculptor on the show, and thank you for being here. And you, it says, I'm kind of like reading over the biography that's in front of me right now, and it says that you express your passion through your art. It nourishes your soul. We all can identify with that, all of us artists. You breathe life into clay, and like I said, you're going to be our first sculptor, so we're gonna talk about that process a little bit later on in the show. And you also love encouraging and supporting individuals in their creativity and inspiring people through your books and lectures and mentorship programs. You've been a sculptor for 30 plus years. Also a portrait sculptures, including legends of like B.B. King, Willie Nelson, and Bill Monroe. There's some names there. You're a published author, which we'll talk about your book later on in the podcast, 3D Technology and Fine Art. And I have a thing here that I can't read. Fine Art and Craft, exploring 3D printing, scanning, sculpting, and mining. And you also have another book called The Zen of Business and Carving a Creative Life. And then your most recent sculptor, which we'll talk about also a little more in depth, is the Alice in Wonderland's Tea Party. Move one place on. That's the title, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so let's dive in. Tell us a little bit. I read a little bit about you, but you tell us about you in your words.
Oh, my word. Well, I think you said it all. I'm a very busy person.
Yes.
And I besides, like many artists, being the artist, you also have to be the salesman. You have to be the marketing person. And sometimes that's really, really hard to do because we wear so many hats.
Yes.
And if we don't, we're not successful. And I can't tell you how many times, artists say, well, I'm just going to go in my studio and create. Well, you have to do more than that. You have to get your name out there. And so I had a marketing background, so that has really, really helped me. The two things I would say that have helped me the most in my career was having a marketing background and being a writer, because both of those have helped me as an artist. So yes, I was a painter before I started sculpting many, many years ago. I did watercolors, and I moved into sculpting and kind of never looked back. It was my thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like I had come home. So I've been sculpting for all these many years, and I am not a studio artist. I know many artists that are, and God bless you for those people that are listening that are studio artists and that can go into their studio and create and then sell their stuff however they sell it. I'm a commissioned artist, so my work is sold before I even begin on it, and that's kind of the way that I work from project to project. And sometimes there's many more. Like we've got 4 things going on down in the studio at different stages right now. So that's a little bit of, and I'm a writer, and I love my writing. So I always say I have 2 loves. I have 2 muses, and I play them one against the other. So when I'm down in the studio sculpting, the writer muse comes to me and says, come on over here, you know you love me better. And I go, I don't have time for you right now. And they say, oh, yes, you do. Here's an idea or 2. And then I just I've learned to play them at bay, one against the other, and write down something that I'm going to write about later. And then after I'm done sculpting, go to my writing. And the same thing happens when I'm writing. I have this urge to want to sculpt. So I have learned to play them off of each other, and that's been a good thing, because there was a time in my life, and I think we're grown up. We grow up with that. Figure out what you want to do. You have to do one thing, and that's
Right.
it.
Yeah.
And drop everything else.
Right.
And I think for artists, that's really difficult to do, because we're creative in so many ways. I think our educational system does that, even in higher education. Mm-hmm. If you want to be a painter, then you must just study oil painting. I mean, that drove me crazy. When when I went to higher education, I said, but my mind is so diverse. How do I just pick one thing? I can't. And luckily, I found a college that allowed me to explore all of those venues in an interdisciplinary art program where I got my master's at Goddard College. So I just don't know how people focus. I'd throw up if you told me I had to focus on one thing for 4. I wouldn't be able to do it. I'd go crazy. So yeah, that's how I am.
Yeah, I totally get that. And there's a small, well, I don't know how small it is. I have a small group of friends that kind of have the same thing going on. You know, we're painters, but we're also writers. And, you know, some people, well, I write instruction books. It's like, no, you know, we're like completely out of this writing instruction books thing and into this writing fiction. And, you know, so it's, I mean, I'm not putting anybody down who's writing instruction books. Those drive me crazy when I write them. So I totally understand that's a lot of work as well. And I've done that route, but I enjoy my fiction, and I totally get this, you know, everybody trying to grab your attention in your head and all the different voices in your head. And, you know, it is an interesting life if you ever get to that point. Hearing, like you were saying, playing them off of one another is kind of an interesting aside that goes on in your mind all the time, I think. So
yeah, it's a party up there.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. You're never alone, right? It's so cool.
Never alone. It's a party. All those voices. Yes, I hear voices.
Now somebody's out there calling like Belleville for us right now. It's like these ladies are crazy.
Right.
So, as I said, you're our first sculptor, excuse me, not sculpture, but sculptor on the program. So, walk us through the process a little bit. Is it the 3D-ness of it that really has caught you?
You know, when I started sculpting years ago, because I've been attracted to portraits my entire life. So I would sketch people, and I think there's a saying out there on the internet that I see the heavens, I see the world in the face of the elderly and the heavens in the face of a child. There's just something about connecting to people that is really, really important to me. And I did that through my sketches, my portrait sketches many years ago. It would make sense then I would move into that as a sculptor. So I do a lot of portraits, and I sculpt a lot of deceased loved ones, which is a whole podcast in itself. I mean, really it is. Yeah. And we can move back to that subject later if you're interested, but there's so many incredibly cool things that I've discovered with the connection with my subjects that it's really pretty interesting. So as a portrait sculptor or as a commissioned artist, usually a client comes to me and wants something. And then many times I can try to feed my desire. If I want to do 2 children playing in a fountain, I can try to feed my desire into what they're looking for. And a lot of times those things that I desire or have desired end up coming up into my work anyway. I was reminded of that not long ago when a new piece I'm working on is a very large sculpture of Eve. And it's an Art Nouveau piece with all these swishes of like Art Nouveau ribbon that's coming up over in her and underneath her. And I thought, I can't believe someone's paying me to do this. I've wanted to do this all my life. And so in my process, there are several different ways that I can go. The traditional manner of sculpting and getting to a piece, either life-size or monumental, would be that you sketch out a design in whatever way, or a pencil sketch or whatever way you would do that. And then hopefully the client likes your ideas and wants to pay you. And then you create a small maquette, which is a small clay figure of what you want to do life size. And then you have to go from the small clay maquette to life size and monumental, whatever the client decides they want. And you're enlarging those point by point in clay in your studio, which is a very tedious process, making armatures created out of plumbing pipe or welding, rebar or whatever. My least favorite part of the process. And then you move to finalizing the detail approval, and then it goes through the bronze pot process, which You can either send your whole sculpture off to a foundry to create into bronze, or you make rubber molds with fiberglass mother molds in your studio. You send those molds to the foundry paints wax in them, and it's the traditional lost wax method of bronze casting. And so, the investment casting, etc. That's the normal traditional way of doing it that's happened for many, many years. And instead, I've incorporated a lot of digital technology into my sculpting. So sometimes I actually sculpt in a program called ZBrush or Mudbox inside the computer, and then send those digital files to a company that will enlarge it in foam or reduce it down and 3D print it. And they enlarge it by doing something called CNC milling, computer numerically controlled milling, which is really cool to see. And then they enlarge it up and they send me these huge foam pieces and many, 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 many parts, and I have to put them together like a jigsaw puzzle.
That's interesting.
And then I sculpt on them. I carve on them, and I add a small layer of clay and fine detail. And sometimes they even put an armature in there. For example, I think you have a picture of the Grambling tiger.
Yes, that's up right now.
15 foot tall. And in that sculpture, they had sent me this foam in pieces, and they had this square rebar in there. So so that the legs would fit into the torso, and then I could bolt them together, and then I could raise this tiger up after we sculpted on it and bring it back down and undo them. So it became very easy and convenient. So I didn't have to stand on scaffolding to sculpt the face or that type of thing. So having these digital processes have been really, really helpful in a couple ways. First of all, it's less work for me, and less work means I can create more pieces in a year. And it takes a lot of the drudgery. Like I said, I hated making armatures. I hated enlarging them piece by piece. So if I can send off my maquette, if another way that instead of sculpting in the computer would be, I would have my clay maquette, and then I have a 3D scanning company, or I have a 3D scanner here that would scan all the way around the maquette. So then I still have a digital file, and then that would be enlarged. So I don't have to sculpt inside the computer. I can still have that tactile feel. And for me, sculpting in the computer kind of feel, and a lot of artists feels more, less fluid because you're sculpting in a computer. But there are a lot of things that you get in the computer that you don't have in your studio. For example, I can zoom in really close. I can flip a piece upside down. Whereas if I'm going to do that with a tiger, I can't flip the tiger, but a 15-foot tiger, but I can crawl underneath there and, do an acrobatic dance to try to sculpt the underside of his belly. So there are some advantages, and there are some disadvantages. Like I say, there is this often this feeling of being disconnected from the piece because I can't touch it. As a sculptor, touch is so very, very important in my process, feeling that tactile experience. And so, so that's a little bit about my process, and I play with that process, both the digital and the traditional, and I researched that process for many, many years. That's why I wrote the book 3D Technology and Fine Art and Craft, exploring 3D printing, scanning, and sculpting and milling, because I wanted to find fine artists that were also pushing the boundaries of digital technology combined with fine art, and that there's people who have been doing it, but it's few and far between. And we had to graduate to a place where the art could be accepted as art, because people said, well, you're using technology, so it's not really art, it's cheating or something. But there was also a time when photography was not accepted as an art form.
Right. Yep.
So it's been a process of getting to this where it's been accepted. And now I'm just thrilled as, punch, because my book, I have, I've always said I'm in two camps. I'm in the digital camp and I'm in the fine art camp. And now I've seen my book accepted. It's, it's used by libraries and maker spaces and universities to teach 3D technology, but it's also collected in the Museum of Fine Arts Library in Houston and the Albright Knox Art Gallery Art Library in New York, in Buffalo. So it's truly, bridged that huge crevasse between fine art and 3D technology. So that's a little bit about my process.
Cool. Cool. I want to take one step back into your process. Two questions coming up from that. I always find it interesting that when you were talking about the beginning process of it, the beginning of your process, you were talking about presenting sketches or drawings to the person that's commissioning you, and it's just always amazing to me that I hear how much drawing is so much the foundation for whatever media we are talking about.
Absolutely. And I encourage, whenever I'm talking to students, because I like to do mentorships and internships and everything, I encourage everybody to increase their drawing skills. And actually, I could use to increase my drawing skills. You can't ever not practice drawing,
Right.
I don't have time to draw and sketch. I wish I did have more time to draw and sketch. And sometimes, to be perfectly honest, like this last piece with Eve, one of my interns pulled her out of the studio and I said, will you strike this pose? And will you strike this pose? She wasn't naked, of course. I don't require that much of my intern. But it gave me a basis for some gestures that I wanted in piece. And so sketching is really, really important. There are programs, though, are in the computer. There's one program called Poser, and I love this program. And it's interesting because Smith Micro, who makes Poser, I went to a SIGGRAPH convention, which is a great big computer graphics convention where, you have all these people that do movies and cartoons, etc. They're there, and all these software companies are there. And this company called Smith Micro was there, and I asked them if I could come because I was doing a book signing at SIGGRAPH. And I said if they wanted me to, since I was there, I'd love to present how I use Poser, because people are using Poser for things like, I don't know, to create video games and that type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm doing this presentation in this booth, wondering, I don't know how many of these computer people are really going to be intrigued with the way that I use it as a fine artist. But I said, Poser is kind of like having those mannequins, those little posable mannequins that we had in the studio, those really rough wooden things.
Right.
But instead, you get to pose a real human being. A human being inside the computer. You can make it into whatever pose you want. And I loved it because it helped me to see the pose. It was the less of all the digital processes, Poser, I was more connected to Poser than, sculpting in a computer or whatever, because I could take a female model and I could move her here and I could move her there. So sometimes I would pose the figure in Poser and I would bring in artifacts, like I would bring in if it was a little girl that was going to be at a cemetery plot, I might bring in a little rectangle for her cemetery, like her little, plot thing, and then have her interact with that. And for me, it made it so much more fun coming up with this process, because if you're sketching, you got to find a model.
Mm-hmm.
And you gotta, and then and all this, and it becomes so overwhelming. And I remember the first time I started to use Poser was I was doing a sculpture of a little boy who was running like Batman with a cape, a towel tied behind his on his neck, and I had this little boy in the yard running back and forth. He must have been the poor kid, 25 minutes, and I was shooting the pictures trying to get the right, and I couldn't get it. Mm-hmm. But in Poser, you can actually make your characters run and then freeze frame them. And so, and you can even, put cloth on them and see how the air would blow the cloth. And it just made my job so much easier in Poser. So I was getting back to my story about being at SIGGRAPH, and this guy came up, and I'm going through my little seal of my art in Poser, and he turns to me and he says, "Well, you've changed my life." And I
Oh,
felt
wow.
really weird. Like, what does that mean? You know? And he
Right.
says, "Now my life has meaning again." And I looked at him and said, "I'm sorry, what do you do?" And he says, "I created this program. And this is why I created the program. And it's gone in a whole other direction, but you are using it the way I intended to."
Oh,
And I
nice.
went, "Oh, I felt so flattered." So anyway, sketching is really important, but having this program called Poser, it's really helped me to be able to expedite my process. There's also a free program called DAZ, which you could do the same thing, and there's so many 3D models. Back when I started, there were no 3D models. Like, you were limited to what you could get.
Right.
So, I mean, now, you could get a 3D model of a woman and put her in, well, let's be honest, it's 3D, and it's a male dominated thing. So you'll find a lot of busty women with skimpy clothes. But yeah, it is becoming more mainstream, with the type of things that are available, and it's been fun to incorporate that. But yeah, sketching in any way, shape, or form is really, really important.
So,
Long answer to a
no, no,
short
no, no,
question.
no, that's great. It's great. It's no problem. So I'm assuming then that maybe Poser helps with when you're doing someone who has died and you're doing a bust of them. Does that help you there as well? Because I'm sort of thinking they probably only have like photographs, and usually probably
Not
just one of them sitting there smiling, right? So,
not so much with a bust, but with, like,
mhm.
for Jenna, and I think I have a video of Jenna on my YouTube channel. When I
Okay.
did Jenna, the mother had asked me, that when I do a posthumous sculpture, especially children,
Mhm.
the parents will send me their clothes, they'll send me video, they'll send me photographs, they'll send me their toys, and they'll send me as many photographs as they can get. And children are hard because they change so
Yes.
quickly.
Yes.
And so if the kid is 7 years old and I'm getting pictures from newborn to 7, it's really hard to figure out what that's going to look like. Video is good because then you can freeze frame and try to get that.
Mhm.
But the mom sent me this, and Jenna was, I think she was 27 months when she died of cancer.
Oh.
And so the mother had sent me this photograph of her and her dress, and she said, "Do whatever pose you want." Well, I could get this Poser program, and I could morph a baby to make it look a little bit heavier, and I even found a dress that was similar, and so that I could see how the dress would look with an interaction. And I posed this baby in maybe 6 different poses, which was a lot quicker than me doing 6 sketches.
Mhm.
It was just a lot faster.
Mhm.
And then I said to the parent, "Tell me which one of these you like." And then it really helped my client to narrow down what they want. Now, there is some disadvantages with using the digital technology in doing these presentations, because clients tend to think that it's going to look exactly like the model.
Right.
And I go, "No, this is a rough sketch. Just, part of me recently has just wanted to take those digital models, and instead of showing them the digital models, bring them out of the computer, sketch on the piece of paper, and say, this is what you're going to get." And I did that actually with this last project I worked on,
Mhm.
because I was tired of the clients couldn't grasp the idea that this is just a thought. This is the direction I'm going in. And once you prove this direction, then it gives me my creative reign to push in that and go further with it. But this is just a sketch. So it has, again, its pluses and its minuses.
Right. So we heard the part that you dislike, which was, all of the working with the rebarb and the ornaments and things like that. So what's your favorite part about sculpting?
If it's a deceased loved one, it is connecting to that person, which is not always an easy task, depending upon the way they died, and the connection that I have to the loved ones, because there seems to be a very important element. If the parents or the loved ones are closed off, then it becomes harder, because I really connect to the deceased loved one through the person that the family. Right. If they're closed off, then it's hard for me to get them. If a child has died of an accident, it's usually harder for me to capture them. I kind of liken it to the fact that it's like they're trying to hide from me, like they're playing a game of hide and seek. Like they're almost afraid that, you know, they made a mistake by dying, like I did this wrong, and whereas if they've died of a lingering illness, it's much easier to capture, because I'm trying to get their essence, right? Not just a likeness. I'm trying to find their essence, and I can get to getting very close to that and not have their essence, but there's a point in the sculpting process when I know I got it, and the piece and I have become friends. That's the point where that's my favorite part, when you get to that. I call it my Peter Pan moment, because, you know, you ever seen that show Hook, where the little boy sees Hook and he's smushing his face around, and then he looks at him and he goes, "There you are, Peter Pan." And it's kind of how I feel, because I've been smushing the clay around that I finally get whomever I'm trying to capture, and that's a really cool moment. So, and I like the money.
I love honesty.
And that's why.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna lie. I like the money. I like getting paid. I like being able to pay my mortgage with what I love to do. I love the interaction of people, and I'm the other thing I love is I'm a perpetual documenter. It's just that's the writer in me, and so all you have to do is Google me, and you're going to find YouTube, and you're going to find process pages of blogs of process, and I just document everything. Matter of fact, I've made it. I offer it to my clients. I'll say to them, I can create this sculpture for you, and if you'd like, there's no extra charge. I can document the whole thing. It's kind of like being in the artist studio. And then they usually go, "Wow,
yeah,
really? That's really cool." I said, "Yeah, I'll create your own blog for you. And if you're trying to raise money for this, then this is really helpful, because then you can send all of the people that are trying, you know, that you think that might be interested in funding this project to the blog and see how it's going along, because it's much easier to raise funds for a sculpture that's already created or being created than one that's just imaginary, you know, that's in your head." And so I have several process blogs throughout, and those are good and bad. You know, there's some times where I've done that, and then the client has come back to me and says, "That looks like that," or "You're doing that," and I go, "It's not done. You know, it's not finished. You're not allowed to say anything until that day where you come back to my studio, and it's the day of approval. Until then, you know." But anyway, I can't stop documenting, and I love the documentation process.
Yeah, it's got it that the blog part that you were talking about, that is so much of the behind the scenes piece that everybody likes to see. So it makes sense while you're documenting to go ahead and do that, because that's the behind the scenes part that everybody likes to get that glimpse into. You know, a lot of times when I'm painting, or even when I'm writing, I'll post teasers from my fiction books, or I'll post work in progress photos of the painting that I'm working on, and they always seem to get a lot more of likes than the finished piece. So I always wonder where I went off, you know, on the path wrong. But yeah, that's the behind the scenes part. That's the really interesting thing. So makes sense.
I think it really is important for artists, because I don't want to, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is my strong feeling. People buy art not just because they like the art. They buy the art because they like the artist.
Oh yeah.
And the more personable you can become, the more out there you can become, then people are going to get to know you, and well, hopefully that's a good thing, and they like who you are on, in social media, because otherwise it could really you could be shooting yourself in the foot. But I think it's good marketing to get yourself out there,
Right.
and remember that if you're talking about, we could talk about marketing all day long, but if you're talking about like search engine optimization, the more your name is out there on the internet, the more your name, the easier it is going to be for you to come up as you're doing it, as people are searching for something. And all my work comes off the internet, so and off social media. I got a $20,000 commission off of Facebook once. So, it's really important for us to get, and it's hard for artists because we're usually pretty, we just want to be by ourselves creating in the studio, and everybody leave us alone.
Yeah. It's amazing though how much folks. I don't know. I guess I see both sides of that, where folks are just, I just want to go paint, leave me alone. I don't want to do any of this marketing stuff. And then like months later, you hear them complain about, the fact that nothing's happening. It's like, well, you're creating a lot. So, but yeah, you have to do that marketing part. It makes sense. And then I know a lot of extrovert artists too, that, it just falls naturally into what they're doing. They can incorporate it very, very easily. And those are usually the ones that are more successful. So got to do that. Got to do both pieces. So.
Yeah, I really like the marketing part. So.
Well, you're probably the first one that I heard say that they really like the marketing part, but.
Well, it's so much fun. I mean, people get stressed out about it, but you can make it. I could give you story after story after story of things that I've done that were just so much fun to do.
Yeah.
And even like with this newest piece that I'm working on, can we talk about the Alice project?
Yes, actually, that's where I was going next, because you said that mostly your work was commissioned. So, and you also talked about how you incorporate, what some things that you wanted to do in a sculpture through that. So I think we answered that question. So yeah, let's go back. Let's start into Alice in Wonderland. Tell us about that project.
Well, Alice in Wonderland is 6 years of my life. I've been trapped in a rabbit hole. And people look at me and they go, 6 years? Were you sculpting on this for 6 years? No, it took me 3 years to get the client to sign on the dotted line. I'm not kidding you. I mean, it started with, I created a sculpture for the Jewish Community Center here of Evelyn Rubenstein. And I heard the client might want something for a park. So as I'm working on Evelyn, I'm also coming up with some park ideas. I went through having a giant in the ground to a bunch of other stuff. And the Rubensteins went to New York City, and there's a famous sculpture in New York City of Alice in Wonderland created by Lecreft in I think it was 1959 it was dedicated. And so I'd never seen it. I didn't even hear about it. But the Rubensteins went there, and then they came back and they showed me some pictures, and I went, wonder if we could do something like that. So I started to search, and of course, copyright is always a really important issue. And I found that it was in the public domain. And so as long as I didn't create any of the characters like Disney's Alice in Wonderland, I was fine. And so I started to research the original Tennell illustrations, which are incredible, and Lewis Carroll, and the books, which there are two, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass and What Alice Found There. And so I researched both of those books and decided it would be really great to do a sculpture of the Mad Hatter Tea Party. So I came up with some sketches, digital sketches, and showed the client. And he came back with, I want it bigger. I went, okay, let's go bigger. So all the characters went from life size to being monumental. I think that Mad Hatter's 9 foot tall.
Yeah, that's the picture that's right now.
It's huge. I mean, you can't even imagine how big this thing is. And so it took me 3 years to get him to sign on the dotted line. And then we probably sculpted on it for about 1.5 years.
Wow.
And I had 12 different interns working with me in different capacities. And I pay all my interns, unless there are students that need it for student credit. I pay all my interns. And so we had 12 different interns. Some of them were working locally. Some of them were working with the digital technology. To add to this whole progress, we had 150 things, because I discovered that the story was 150 years old. And they celebrated this anniversary the week before my client signed, which was not very advantageous to him, because we could have gotten a lot of marketing off of it had he signed before the 150th anniversary. And I spoke at the Lewis Carroll 150th anniversary celebration here in Austin, and but I couldn't announce where it was going to go, because to be perfectly honest, before he signed, I was so frustrated. I was going to sell it to somebody else. I was going to find another buyer. And then they signed on it, on the dotted line and the contract, and I started working on it. And it took us, and then the foundry was in Santa Fe and I'm in Houston, Texas. And I was trying to send them in pieces, the things in pieces. And then there was a series of unfortunate events. That sounds like Lemony Snicket. But there was a series of unfortunate events with the foundry in Santa Fe, and they went under. Wow. And I didn't know that they went under until I did a search for Alice to find more pictures of people visiting the sculpture at the foundry, and discovered an article saying that the IRS was going to seize all their property. Wow. And which would have meant my Alice. Mm-hmm. So I had to go and save Alice. And it wasn't like going to the foundry and saying, okay, I'll put her in my back pocket. No, we had to have a semi. And it was just a major undertaking. But Deep in the Heart Art Foundry came, and they were my heroes, and they helped me save Alice. And it was so it lingered for another 7 months, waiting for all the resolution of that, and finally got back on track, thank God. And it's going to be installed on Monday.
Yay!
So like, I'm so really happy.
Yeah.
And I know there was a point when I started with the Alice sculpture, I think we were talking about marketing. The marketing capabilities with Alice, and I think that's what people don't realize, is that marketing is a many-fingered thing. If you're doing a project like Alice, there is a whole section of marketing on the literature aspect of it. There's a whole section of marketing on the 3D technology aspect of it. There's a whole section of marketing on the travel and as a destination site aspect of it. And I think that's where artists get themselves bogged down. They can't see how their artwork their marketing can draw out, and how they can take advantage of each one of those. And in my case, I really did try intentionally, because it was fun, to do that. When I started the sculpture, I had coverage in Italy. And the coverage that I was getting in Italy was because I was using 3D technology, and my book had come out, and they thought it was really cool with the 3D prints of the March hare. And so I got this coverage out of Italy. So the marketing is just astronomical on it. Now, the 150 things, the park has said, well, we'd like the list of the 150 things. They said, well, good luck. Nobody's going to get that list in my head. I've hidden things in that sculpture that the interns don't even know about. The interns had a great time, because they would come in and I'd say, okay, I need somebody to create a piece of cake similar to this illustration. In the Tennel illustration, you can use your own, whatever you want to do, and it's got to be 1 inch wide. And they had a ball. They were just having a great time trying to make some of these hidden things. My granddaughter even hid something. She was 3 at the time, so she made a rose. Grandma, you remember when I made a rose? I had my son-in-law. I 3D scanned his face and then reproduced it down and his face is one of the cards that paint the roses red.
Oh, wow.
So, there are, and what we would do is we would, so now once we got the clay, so we did the CNC milling up to 9 foot, and we put the clay on it, and once the clay was there, we could then either sculpt these little tiny things and hide them in there, or in many cases, like all of the buttons, pay attention to all the buttons, have hidden things in them. And sometimes I was working with another artist that would help me get them together in ZBrush, and we would sculpt them in the computer. We would send them to another guy who fixed the files to make sure they could 3D print, and we sent them to a company here, Interactive Copiers in Houston, who 3D printed them for us, and then we embedded them into the clay, and the molds were then made over the clay and the 3D prints. Now we're taking some of those objects and we're making them as collectible Christmas ornaments. So we're pulling those objects out of the piece, and if they need more of a frame around them or whatever, then we're making them as objects that are that were hidden, but now you can collect as a collectible. And so that's been kind of fun. And the scene, besides, let me explain the scene. The scene is a 10-foot table with a 10-foot bench in front, and there's a Mad Hatter on the left-hand side who was in this chair, but looks like he just stood up to pour tea, and he's reaching over the table, and the tea is pouring and splashing all over everything. And his chair is tipped back, and on the right-hand side is a huge chair with Alice, and the Cheshire Cat is on top of that chair. Now, my client said, can we make the chair a little wider so people can sit next to Alice, which was a great suggestion, and we did. So it's the perfect opportunity for a photo op. And then in the middle in the back is a March hare that's 9 foot tall, and he's dipping a watch into a teacup, as in the story. Mm-hmm. Kennel illustrations were in the story was our inspiration. So this is all straight from the story. So if you know Lewis Carroll, then you'll know a lot of what this stuff means. Mm-hmm. And as he's dipping his clock into the teacup, he's looking over to his right. And the way that I created the sculpture, which was really hard to do, because I never saw the entire thing together until last week.
Oh, wow.
And because we didn't have enough room, mm-hmm. and we kept having to feed the foundry molds. So we would do Alice and the March Hare and send those off, and do the Mad Hatter and then work and send him off and work on the table and send that off. So we never had everything all together. And so the scene is not complete till you're there, because every character interacts with an empty space. And so the dormouse who's shoved in the teapot is also on the table, and he's interacting with an empty space. In addition to this scene where you can bring your family and have tea and have crumpets on this bronze table, in addition to this scene, there is a pedestal that's made kind of like an old log in a huge storybook. And this is where the treasure hunt begins, because there's a little mouse sitting on a leaf, and he's reading the text in the dedication. And if you look at the top of the book, there's a white rabbit that's jumping down a black hole that's in the top of this like rotted out log. And then if you walk around this log, you see the cutaway, and the rabbit's jumping down, and Alice, there's a tiny Alice in there falling, and there's the hall of doors and the pool of tears. And so there's just many, many things in this pedestal. And then you move to the sculpture, and there's a ton of things. The name of the sculpture is called Move One Place On. And I'm hoping that people will understand that when they visit the sculpture with their family or friends, somebody should stand up and say what the Mad Hatter says in that chapter 7. And that is, I want a clean cup. Let's all move one place on. And then everybody will switch places. Like they do in the story, because that's what they do in the story. Yep. So with the Mad Hatter and then Move One Place On, the marketing aspects of it and the digital technology has been astronomical, and it's not going to end. Now that I've hidden 150 things, the marketing of that continues, because now I'm going to start to reveal those 150 things. So I have a really long marketing plan ahead of me, revealing them. I created a free book for people to become the Wonderland detectives, that people can do printables. I'm creating educational materials for libraries and schools. Because it's done with digital technology, there is a whole educational initiative called STEAM, which is the incorporation of science, technology, engineering, art, and math. Some people take art out of it and they say STEM, but I say as an artist, defend that A and go with STEAM. STEAM is an educational initiative. I recently spoke at the Texas Art Educators Conference as the keynote on STEAM. And I can't explain to you how many times I've had to defend the A to take it from STEM to STEAM. And it's really important because I dare anybody to have, can you imagine anybody having an art fair without using art?
No.
I mean, a science fair without using art?
No.
You know, how do you make your volcano if you can't sculpt it? Or how do you create your boards without, you know, doing poster boards, without doing some type of creative process of making your poster boards?
Right.
And so I think art is really an important element of STEAM because it helps you to be able to show what you're talking about, but I think it also opens up a different dialogue that you normally didn't see or wouldn't see. For example, there's a woman in my book. I'm sorry, I'm jumping around, but there's a woman in my book who did a sculpture, who did a 3D scan of her breast cancer. She just wanted to see what it looks like. And so there's free software you can get that will take your MRI and do that. And I have that written in the book. And so she did this and she 3D printed her cancer. And then she made a bronze of it large. And there was a doctor that was walking through the exhibit and looked at it and said, "We have never looked at cancer like this before. This is telling us something." And now they're developing a whole way of testing and figuring out about breast cancer through what her art did. And I think that's what the A in STEAM does. It helps you to be able to see things in a different way that you normally wouldn't, because you're looking at it with fresh art eyes. So the whole STEAM initiative with the sculpture is huge, and the educational initiative. So it adds, as I add this educational element to it, and I've added something that was in my own heart and made my job a lot easier, was the digital technology. I'm also adding another marketing tendril that is very long and it's a hot topic. 3D printing and STEAM is a very hot topic right now. So it's been good. And here's a little hint. In the scene, when you go to visit it, you will notice that the teapot that the Mad Hatter holds looks kind of plain. So this is one of the 150 hidden things. And there's another teapot that the dormouse is stuffed in, and it's very ornate and Victorian, but this one is rather plain. And so the reason why this one is plain is if you look on the bottom of it, there's going to be an inscription that helps you to understand what it means. But it's a famous teapot called the teapot, or the Newell teapot. And a professor, Newell in Utah, many, many years ago, went to his wife and said, "I think I'm going to use mathematics and create one of the first things in the computer that's 3D. I want to create art in the computer that's 3D. What would you have, or what would you think I could create?" And she said, "Here's my teapot, try this. It's difficult enough, but it's easy enough." And so the first computer graphics to be created was a teapot in the computer.
Oh, wow.
Otherwise known as the Newell teapot or the Utah teapot. Look it up, you'll find lots of stuff on it. And so and you can get this teapot. It's actually, sometimes you get a computer graphics program and you'll have like a square, a rectangle, a triangle, a star, and a teapot. And people go, "Why do we have a teapot in this program?" Well, because it's like an homage. And you'll see this teapot in Toy Story and and all sorts of, Homer Simpsons, it appears. So I thought, I'm having a tea party, and I'm using digital technology. I have to put this teapot in there.
Oh yeah.
And so I'm very excited. I'm excited about the hidden objects. I'm excited about the 3D technology. One last thing we are going to do with this sculpture, which I don't know has ever been done before, and that is a company came into my studio when we were creating the pieces. This company 3D scans, they have these huge machines, and they 3D scans like oil refineries and really dull stuff, that type of thing. But it captures a lot of detail. And so they came into my studio and they scanned all the pieces when they were in there. They're going to come to the park and they're going to set up their scanners in the park, and they're going to scan the whole area of the park so that we can create a virtual tour or reality of the Alice in Wonderland sculpture project. And hopefully then I can take those scans and find a gaming company that might be interested, and then helping me to create some online educational resource that will work with literacy and Lewis Carroll was a mathematician, the writer, Charles Dodson, of the story was a mathematician. That will work with all of these things to help encourage education and let the sculpture go one place further. See, I told you there was a lot of stuff in my brain.
There is. I'm sitting here thinking, when does this lady sleep?
I'm so sorry I'm rambling. You ask me your next question and I will answer it with a yes or no.
No. No, that's okay. It was interesting to hear all the things that did go into the whole sculpture. And so you sent me a link to a press release that you just sent out. And is it my understanding that this is, the title says something about coming home, so it's going to be in Houston? Is that where it's going to be, or?
Yeah, I'm so lucky that I'll have this piece in my home, where I'm living, Yeah, so it'll be, it's in an area of Houston called Bel Air. And it'll be right here. And it's going to be installed on Monday, and the dedication is the 21st of April. So if you live somewhere between here and Bastrop, Texas, and you see a huge Mad Hatter Tea Party going down the freeway on the back of a semi, take a picture and send it to me, please.
Well, there you go. That'll be useful. So that's really exciting. I mean, I'm sitting here looking at the little girl kissing Alice's cheek in one of the pictures that came out of this recent press release, and that you just sent me. And it's such an adorable. It's an adorable picture. I'd been sitting here looking at it and looking at all the detail in Alice itself, and then the cat on the back of the chair. The chair itself has a lot of detail as well, and there's this little girl just kissing the cheek. So cute.
That's actually my granddaughter. And
that's your granddaughter.
Yeah, that's my granddaughter Issa, and she came to the foundry with me, and they had this open house, and she was showing everybody the hidden things. And but you got to remember, I mean, see, she's 5 as of last month, and so she grew up with this piece.
Right.
I mean,
right.
I've been doing it for 6 years. She's been in the studio watching it come about, and it was really cute because she would show everybody, and then she'd say, "And I'm the sculptor's granddaughter. Would you like to take a picture of me?" It's really funny.
Cute.
And I don't know how I'm going to reveal the 150 things, trying to figure out the best way. I've enjoyed myself on Instagram putting up pictures. I'd like to read the story. So I know that to reveal the hidden things has to be a quick segment, and I'm considering putting them on Instagram, but I'll also probably do something on YouTube. We'll see.
Yeah, you got to do both. Especially after all that years and years of work to do this. I mean, it's got to be a slow reveal,
Yeah, and I've got to try to rack my brain and remember them all. I know I started to keep a list somewhere, but there is really more than 150 things. So there's 60-something things under the table alone. If you come to the sculpture, people are going to spend more time under the table than on top of the table.
Well, you're going to have to go hang out there and just take pictures of people now, crawling under the table and trying to find all these hidden things. And I mean, that in itself is a slow reveal too. So you have to work that in there some way.
Well, at the Foundry, it was just so incredible to see people come and look at it and interact with it. And I think once it's in its place and people feel like they are more apt to be able to climb or interact with it, I'm very excited to see how people will do that and what. But although my granddaughter said, "Grandma, I have 33 boo-boos." I said, "You do?" She said, "Yes." I said, "Are those bruises from climbing on the sculpture?" She said, "Yes, they are."
Uh-oh.
She counted them all. So be careful with your children on the sculpture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thanks for sharing that with us. I mean, you can tell how excited you are, and rightfully so. And I'm so very happy for you and having this coming home to your hometown and being revealed at quite a time. I'll have to make sure I check out your website and keep up on the dedication and everything. So
thanks. We actually created a website for the sculpture at alicesculpture.com where we'll put more information specifically just to Alice. My creativesculpture.com website has a list of different and many different things on it, but I think we're going to just designate that towards Alice. And going back to the marketing aspect, one of the reasons why I did that was I had a Facebook page for Alice. You can find the whole process on finding Alice Sculpture on Facebook, and it was convenient. But what it did was it didn't give me the search engine optimization or the internet presence that I needed. And we can go over that another time if you're interested. But and so I just moved everything, or I'm trying to move everything to its own space from here forward. So we have some place, and it was hard to search on Facebook. So people that want to know how to find the free printables can do that, or the educational material will be able to do that, etc.
Yeah, it's really interesting because when we talk about social media, and we've had some conversations about this in different podcasts, but everybody thinks that when they post something to social media, whether that be Facebook or Twitter, that it stays alive forever. And in a way it does, because it stays on your own account, but it's only really live for like 20 seconds in the news feed on Facebook and 7 seconds in Twitter. So unless you're like right there, and unless you're on Facebook looking for something absolutely specific, you really aren't going to see it because it's only really quote unquote live for like 20 seconds. So so moving something that gets to search optimization and a solid place on the web. This is why I try to tell the artists that I talk to, this is one of the reasons why a lot of the publishers who want to talk to them want them to have a website, because it's a dedicated place where the story stays, that they can send them to, and it's there. And they know exactly where it is. And it's just a lot more professional than social media. But we won't get into that too much. But we'll have to get together and talk about that at another time in the future.
Absolutely. And I don't want to freak everybody out about having to, sometimes it feels stressful having to be the marketing and the salesperson and do the art. And it doesn't have to be that way. No. But I know that this is, if you're like me, your art is your business, or you would like it to be. And that has its pluses. I don't have to go to work 9 to 5 somewhere else. And that has its minuses, and that I have to deal with clients and I have to deal with vendors. And as I knew last year, some vendors go under, and some are difficult, and I have to deal with interns, and it's not always easy. And I think going back to the other book, which is not published yet, but I'm writing, The Zen of Business and Carving a Creative Life. I think that's why I started writing that book, because I wanted to know how you could strive for what you wanted and still feel at peace with what you had. And is that even possible? And to be perfectly honest, there was a time where everybody was getting on my nerves. The clients, the interns, everybody was getting on my nerves. And so I just, I wanted to find the Zen in the creative process. And again, and so don't let it overwhelm you.
Right.
As you try to do all these things, and make it fun. Because if it's not fun anymore, then why are we doing it?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
There are many ways. If you don't feel like you are good at doing that, then barter with somebody who is good at it.
Yeah.
Or do co-marketing. We could do a whole show on co-marketing.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So yeah, there's a lot of good ways to do that.
Yeah, sounds good. So we're coming to the end of our hour of talking, and I was just curious. We talked a little bit about marketing, and my last question was going to be business advice. But let's just come back to: is there any advice in addition to what we've already talked about that you'd also like to mention at this point?
I'm just going to go back to the idea of making it fun and and not letting this all stress you out, because that's not why you wanted to do it in the first place. It's and you can, if you try to make art your business, you can sometimes take away the intrinsic value of it, and that can be a problem. So think about it. If you don't want to have your art as a business, then do it as a side and keep it as something you love, and go work somewhere else to pay your bills, because it's not for everybody, and not everybody can put that type of time and dedication into it that is necessary for it to come to fruition, like it has. So that's what I would say.
Yeah.
Have fun.
Yeah, that's the truth. It's having fun is the best part about working for yourself, and putting yourself out there, creating every day. It's got to be the reason why you're doing it. We drive ourselves crazy if we did it for any other reason, I think. So
I think it's really easy to get caught up into that.
Oh yeah.
Especially if you start to I've known artists who were really, really successful painters and could sell painting at any price that they wanted to any place and walked away from it because of that same thing.
Right.
It was taking away from what they really wanted to do and the way they wanted to create.
Yeah, I had an interesting conversation with an artist, a very well-known oil painter, whose name I'm not going to say just because I didn't ask him if I could talk about this. But one of the things is we were talking about his art and his journey. And one of the things he said on one of the podcasts that I did when I interviewed him, I had asked the question, so you're in this gallery, you sell this painting, they call you on the phone and they say, we want another one of these. And you've moved on, because he changes what he's painting and how he's painting. He's constantly exploring, and he comes back and he says, well, the answer is no, and here's what I'm doing now. And it's like, and if they don't want that, that's fine. I'll go find another gallery that does. Now, his work is exceptional, so he doesn't have to worry about, is there another gallery out there? But you can tell that the science and understanding, and his mind is constantly in this exploration mode, and he's wonderful to talk to. He's wonderful to podcast with. His artwork is fantastic, but it all comes down to fun for him just as much as it comes down to fun and enjoying what we're doing and wanting to do this, having to do this. We have to do this. That's what it all comes down to for him as well. And he's like, I already painted that. I'm moving on. So it's interesting, that whole process.
I know, and I found this thing. Have you ever heard of Painter's Keys? Go and get that blog. It's so great. But something came into my inbox the other day, and it was it was a quote, and it said, I went on Wednesday to try to get my money, and they weren't going to pay me, and I went on Thursday, and they still didn't pay me, and I went on a Friday, and they threw me out. And all I wanted to do was get paid for what I need, and then you find out it was Michelangelo. Yeah,
I saw that somebody posted something similar to that out on the social media.
And I went, oh my gosh, so
yeah,
people, and that's the other business thing I would say is that just because you want a commission or you want to do art and you want to get paid for it, work smart. Find a good lawyer. Do good contracts and be careful,
right?
Because people will be like the Pope or whatever it was for Michelangelo, and believe that they could get something for nothing, and that the artist shouldn't get paid, and that's really a horrible thing to do. But we have to know our rights, and that's, it's very, very important for us to know that, and how to protect ourselves as artists.
Yes, exactly. So what is the best way for my listeners to get in touch with you? I've got the screen up that has a connect with you on your websites and Instagram and stuff like that. But what's the best way that they can?
If you go to the creativesculpture.com website, there is a contact form. And if you fill that contact form, then it comes into my inbox. And I'm always looking at those contact forms, because that means another commission or something really important is going to happen.
Right.
And if any of them would like a speaker for speaking engagement, I'm happy to come and do that. I do that a lot. Love to do that. And so that's the best way to get a hold of me. But I'm everywhere. You'll find me on Facebook. You'll find me on Instagram. You'll find me on Twitter.
Yeah, so I'll have to find you on Facebook and friend just so that we're kind of linked up together over on that side. So thank you so much for coming on the show. I am so excited for you. I think it's great. I think when you sent me a note asking if you could come on the podcast, and I went out and checked you out, and you had a lot of information naturally that you sent me along with the request to come on the show. And I appreciated that. And I was just so excited for you when I was reading through that. I was like, heck yes, we got to get this lady on.
Oh, you're so kind. Yeah, it's been fun. I've had my life is so exciting.
Yeah.
It's just, it's so exciting. Every day I turn around and there's something new and something really cool happening. So I'm just pleased as punch to be able to share it with your audience, and through all the social media. Check out that Instagram. I'm really excited about the new Instagram, and I'm having fun posting all the pictures on there. I can't wait to take pictures of them, video of them installing the sculpture on Monday and Tuesday, and then fast forward it and watch them, watch the Mad Hatter flying through the air.
There you go. That sounds great. But like I said, thank you so much for coming on the show, and we're going to wrap this up now. We have another podcast that I'll be recording next week, is with an author by the name of Mary Castillo, and she is doing some really interesting things with her work that I think other folks could learn from, and maybe even start thinking out of the box with it, different things like that. So that's next week, and then I'm also gonna be taping another show with Michael Harding. We had to reschedule. There was a conflict. But that'll also happen in April, and hopefully I can grab George Gallo before he goes off on his next pre-production for a film that he's going to be working on over the next couple months. So hang in there, everybody. Again, thank you for being on the show, Bridgette. I appreciate your time, and we'll catch you all next time. Thanks. Bye.
Yes, thank you.
Bye-bye.